Yep.
Yes.
Okay, great. So for those, I think it's probably everyone that's here. I'm imagining it is. That's on the WhatsApp group for the Graft Fellowship group. You might be trying to get the image out of your head of trying to have a seat on a pineapple if you were reading what I was saying there. And I thought it's worth carrying on with that theme, which I promised I would, turn it into something that we would do tonight and show you the connection of why I think there's a connection between that parable and Chanukkah in a certain angle of looking at it. And I want to keep the theme as close to Hanukkah as possible as we lead closer to it, literally now about a week away, just under a week away from it. And obviously want to do my best to make sure that we gain the right appreciation for the time of Hanukkah and just continue to approach it from all kinds of angles. So what I want to do tonight is to use that parable as a base, and in the process of using it as a base, give us some more insight into how we can better appreciate the situation that our beloved gospel testimonies were written in, the circumstances under which they were written. So yeah, let's see if we can get that done. So first, I'll take you back to was this the first? It probably was the first session that I did for this year in terms of looking at Hanukkah again and angling it from looking at the political elements of it. So you should remember from that session, this poster that I put on when we were talking about the fact that it was a political issue. And now, looking at the story of the Pharisees, I want you to specifically take note of that catchphrase on the top: collaborate for a peaceful Jerusalem. Because what I want to do tonight is focus a little bit of attention on who the Sadducees were. We've done that for the Pharisees. We have not spent as much time looking at who the Sadducees are. So that's the idea of what we can have a look at with this session. So firstly, I'm going to ask who I believe to be our resident scripture reader, Kathy, if she wants to get Matthew 25, verse 14 to 30 ready for us, so that we can just read that, just good for us to read that parable so we've got it in our minds as the basis of where we're going to go for this
Okay, got
evening.
it.
Okay, so Kathy, do you want to read for us just 14 to 30?
The parable of the talents. For it will be as when a man going on a journey called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. He who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them, and he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. But he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. Now after a long time the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. And he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you delivered to me 5 talents. Here I have made 5 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. And he also, who had the 2 talents, came forward, saying, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here I have made 2 talents more. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little. I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward, saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not winnow. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sowed, and gather where I have not winnowed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent so take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. For to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have the abundance. But from him who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. There men will weep and gnash their teeth.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so popular parable that is often used, I think, especially in situations in churches when it's time to get more people into ministry and on the team doing things, and it's just too tempting not to project it in that way, and to use it in the sense of, oh, you got these gifts, you must use it or it will be taken away from you, which ironically directly actually contradicts the scripture that says the gifts, I think it's Paul that says in Romans, the gifts of God are irrevocable. So I don't know. But anyway, that's not where I want to go in any case. The point is, as I think I said on the on the group when I spoke about this, and I mean, I deliberately didn't go into a technical approach of how you deal with parables too much, because that wasn't the point of what I wanted to do with that situation. I saw the opportunity to keep the conversation about Chanukkah going, and that's what I did. But I did give basic ideas, as if to say, and the pineapple analogy was meant to suggest to you handle with care, because that's the point. When you over analyze a parable, you destroy it, and it is a prickly, difficult thing to deal with. And my analogy about, if you've done it yourself or you've seen people do it, people have their favorite spots in their house on their couch watching TV where they lay down comfortably. And the problem with that attitude when it comes to parables is that you're going to destroy it. You can't lay down on that pineapple. That's not how it works. So I'm going to give that caution again, to be careful with the parables, because you can overanalyze it and in the process end up destroying it, and no one wants to do that, of course. So that's the point there. Again, I'm not going to attempt to give a blow by blow explanation of how parables work, because sorry, I'm just going to see if I'm getting feedback from someone's sound. If you can just mute until you need to speak, just for the sake of the recording, please, whoever's mic is still on. Okay, so there Kathy read the parable for us, and I want us to talk about elements in that parable. So maybe before I say anything, anyone want to point out anything they find obscure, odd, interesting, whatever, I don't know, in that parable? Any elements that, leaves you intrigued or confused or impressed, whatever, I don't know. Let's just get some thoughts out on the table about that parable in particular. Of course, at this point, don't forget to unmute your mic to speak. Even when we heard Kathy
Well,
read.
without getting too technical on the thing, Darren, but talents at face value looks like money and to do with investments. So
Right.
loath to take it at face value because parables are never that simple.
Right.
And then the other thing is what got me a bit in the end is the bit about the interest and the condemnation on the guy who buried his stuff. And it's almost like, isn't usury forbidden, or in some parts of scripture, or was. So it's a bit strange. But that's just the face value.
Now you're definitely onto something. Anybody else? Okay, so the one thing I can tell you, which is worth noting, here's what you might find interesting. Normally, parables are meant to shock. That was the angle they were used at. In certain first century logic thinking application of Mosaic Torah, do you know who would be the actual honorable servant? It's actually the one who buried it. So no doubt to Jesus' audience, they would have gasped at the thought of that, which was the point. Which is why I say parables, you've got to be very careful how you handle it. It's hyperbole, it's exaggeration for effect. That's what it's doing. Also, all elements in a parable are not equally weighted. They don't all carry the same weight. Not every element in the parable is meant to be given absolute, how can I say, identity. Yeah, I guess I could say that. And that's why I say again, be careful of that pineapple, which if you picked up in the mannerism that I was using, I'm a very graphic person in that way, and I am very verbose, and my sarcasm mixes in when I get excited and frustrated and whatever too. So I would lie to you if I generically, open-endedly said that suggesting people getting a pineapple stuck in their backside was something I'm sorry I said, because I'm not. Part of the reason why I use such a graphic analogy is exactly the same reason why the parable works the way it does. It's to make an extreme statement, and that's what Jesus was doing. He wants to get the audience's attention, and that's a dramatic way to do it. So once he's got the attention, the question is obviously, where are you taking us now? Because you've invited us somewhere, you've grabbed our attention, where do we go next? And that's the point here. Jesus, the parable obviously had meaning. That's one thing. But as I think I said again in the week, in that discussion, you can't only just read Jesus in isolation. Who can tell me if you read what I shared? Can anyone remember what I said in addition to Jesus, the other consideration you actually have to make before you can attempt to interpret what to take from that parable? If anyone can remember what I said about that, give us the answer if you can remember when you read it after me saying it.
Darren, wasn't it, well, I could be wrong here, but wasn't it that sometimes when Jesus spoke, he was actually indirectly speaking to the Pharisees and Sadducees and Pharisees?
Oh, absolutely. And that's definitely a part of what I said when we spoke or when I shared it.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Janet, I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be, but I meant to, so if I didn't actually do it, then it's on my mistake. Did I not share on the group too where I actually said you actually need to filter it through through Matthew first? Because Matthew is actually writing intentionally. Matthew
Yes,
is
you did say.
bringing, I did, right? Yeah, I think I did type that out too.
Yes.
We've got to understand what's Matthew's agenda. And if we go back to the idea that this whole issue of the Gospels, these testimonies of Jesus, that it is actually a political treatise, it's a political campaign, then even more so, we've got to say, okay, Matthew, before I try and attack this parable and get into it, let me take a step back and see what you were doing around this parable. Because you know something, if we get that in place first, it sets us up to be a little bit more accurate, even by accident, without trying too hard, in actually then tackling the parable. That makes sense. That should make sense. Because you didn't just pick up this parable in isolation. You've found this parable neatly, planted in the middle of this document, of this book of Matthew's gospel. So what will we do if we look into that? And I'm going to try and guide it now. And please, you can all tell me if you think I'm getting too creative here. You be the judge. I'll put the idea in front of you and you be the judge. So I'm just going to let Pussy into the meeting here. There we go. Okay, so honing in on one of the verses there, verse 26, but his master answered him, "You wicked and slothful servant, you knew that I would reap where I have not sown and gather where I scattered no seed." I just want to focus in on two words there, really. Wicked and slothful. Because those seem like quite strong words, quite strong, adjectives to describe something. That's quite heavy. So where could this be going? So here's a quote. The Sadducees, on the other hand, were legislative minimalists out of pure laziness who devised their moral code of straight lines slowly as flash justification for their indulgences. Okay, that sounds like quite a mouthful. The Sadducees were legislative, they were into politics, they did that, but they were lazy. The moral code was like superficial justification for the indulgences. And we know that they were siding with the Greek concepts. They were the pets of the Hasmonean dynasty. So let's remember the Hasmonean dynasty. This is the story of Chanukkah. This is that priesthood king mixture that causes so much trouble, and out of them comes the Sadducees and really get empowered out of that story. More so, and well, at least in the first century, more so flowing out of the Hasmonean story. So they have a strong link to that, which is a problem on its own. Isn't it interesting that this description of them would call them lazy when that previous quote in verse 26 mentions slothful? So if we go to the Bible, if we go to the Strong's Concordance, we find that the word there for that would normally be given as slothful, okneros, look what it says. Shrinking, timid, hence, idle, lazy, troublesome. Look at the bottom, right at the bottom, the usage. Look at the first word. Slothful. Isn't that interesting? Now, no doubt, not that the Sadducees would say this of themselves. Derogatory terms, derogatory labels, derogatory descriptions of all kinds of people have always been around. And even if you, as the person receiving the insult, will reject the insult, you are aware of the common insults that get hurled your way. If you know what I'm talking about. Like if you are a believer, particularly a Gentile believer who's championing the idea of the Jewishness of Jesus, someone give me some of the negative labels that gets thrown at you and that you get labeled with, that you don't take yourself, but gets given to you, and you understand the insult and the criticism it's meant to imply. Who wants to give us one of the most obvious ones? That either you've been directly called or people have spoken around you about you, and they use words like, who wants to tell us? There's the one most obvious. Well, there's probably more than one. I'm just thinking of one of the most obvious versions.
I just normally get asked if I'm a member of a cult.
Okay, there's that. I wasn't even thinking of that one, but that's an apt one. How about legalist, Janet? Huh?
Yeah, yes, of course.
That one gets thrown around a lot.
Oh, yes, yes.
Or if they really want to gun you, you got a spirit of the Pharisees or the Sadducees, or I've heard that thrown around a lot too, like it's an official thing. So my point again with this is to say that even when we don't accept the labels ourselves and the insults, we do interpret them. We know what they mean. Anyone who gets insulted in different ways tends to know what the insult means. So my point is, yeah, what if, and I'm just putting a question mark to it, again, you're going to decide for yourself if I'm right or wrong. What if Jesus' parable in this case and the reference to slothful, is it possible that the Sadducees would immediately pick up that that's a dig at them? Not that they own the label themselves, like not that they would take it personally. No doubt the main group who would be giving them that label would be their opponents, the Pharisees. So just something to put out there for you. Here's another quote from T.W. Manson. The Sadducees of history are a body of practical men running the affairs of the nation on what would be nowadays called common sense lines, making the best bargain they can for their people and incidentally for themselves in the existing circumstances. That's interesting as well. Making the best bargain they can. Isn't it interesting that in that parable it talks about making interest and making money? And then the wicked, slothful servant is actually the one who just acts totally self-indulgent, really. The Sadducees were business people. They were very self-absorbed, of course. Or at least let's be fair, at least the ones who are being gunned in the gospel. So there was a clear group of them that were not savory. It's not to say all of them were that way, but without a doubt, the ones that we are getting introduced to are a problem. The Sadducees, the second of the orders, do away with fate altogether and remove, sorry, it's not supposed to be cod, that's God, it's just the way it copied over, beyond not merely the commission, but the very sight of evil. They maintain that man has the free choice of good or evil and that it rests with each man's will whether he follows one or the other. It does not seem to me that the Sadducees are here attempting to deny providence altogether and to remove God from all contact with the world after the manner of Epicureanism. It is the problem of evil with which they are concerned. They would allow that God is the cause of good things and that happen in the world. They could do no other, for Scripture asserted it plainly enough. So God does what's good. That's what they're suggesting. What they would not allow was that God was in any sense the cause of evil, either by direct action or by toleration. So the other point is the general idea of the Pharisees, a good Pharisee. Remember, I've spoken before, you can have good Christians, bad Christians, good Jews, bad Jews, good Muslims, bad Muslims, and that basically just ends up meaning you don't hold to the most extreme tenets of that belief system, then you're a bad version of it. Whatever you think you are, you're just a bad version if you're not holding properly to what they believe. So a good Sadducee, being holding to their beliefs, really just believes that evil has got like nothing really to do with God. God's separate to it, and they avoid it in their own minds. They're avoiding evil, of course. And what they basically say is, you do what you will. It's like completely in you. Yeah. Yeah, so God's related to the good and not to the bad, but that you've got this absolute freedom. In fact, a kind of freedom that is, yeah, pretty much would open its way in certain degrees to licentiousness. Like you really had so much control that it was quite a wonderful life, I'd say. And here's the interesting thing, you got to think about that. Look at that parable. You see, when you look at the parable and you think of this idea, two of the servants act in a way that is not only in their own interests. Someone tell me why I can say, to explain what I mean when I say that. I'm saying two of those servants acted in a way that was not in their own interest only. Or actually, it doesn't imply in the course of their actions, of their activity, that they were gaining anything. They were working for their master.
one that had 5 talents and the one that had 2, who went away and made the same again.
Right. And Kathy, does it imply to you that they were living for themselves?
No, it doesn't.
Right. So the one who does tend to live for himself, that acts quite pointed out, like clearly pointed out, slothful, is the one that did nothing. Isn't that interesting? It's the one that actually, think about it, it's the one who actually acted like he is his own master. If you get that, what I'm saying there, because he doesn't act as if there's some force outside of himself to be reckoned with, actually. And when you frame it in that way, doesn't the actions of the master coming back seem more justified? See, when the master comes back, he is appalled. And the reason can only be because that servant has acted in a way that implies the master wasn't coming back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Now, with that framework, with that thinking, we can now go and read Matthew further. But maybe before we do that, the Sadducean factors, let's just look at it again from an overview. They were the collaborators. As I said, their plan is not to rock the boat. They're just going to take it easy. They're living the good life. They've got money. Is Rome in charge? Okay, we can bend to that. Are the Greeks in charge? Okay, we'll bend to that. What? We need to get into bed with Herod. Okay, we'll do that too. That was the general posture, and that again would be the criticism leveled against them by their other Jewish family. So here's the other big thing I want to look at. They deny the resurrection. That's one of the big things that put them at odds with the Pharisees. Look, there's a lot more other things, and the point is not to draw a comparison to not a long list comparison between them. I've handpicked these for good reason, which I will explain. And the third one that I'm pointing out here, if you didn't know it, they denied angels and demons. Did anyone who didn't know that? They denied angels and demons.
I don't think I knew that, Darren.
Sorry. I hadn't thought of it, so I don't suppose I did know it really.
Now, just think about this. Just stop on the denied angels and demons alone. If you're a first century follower of a rabbi with a political agenda that you're pushing, and you know that these Sadducees were not your friends, and you know that they don't believe in angels and demons, what topic might you go out of your way to put into your letter, into your story? You might be inclined to want to talk about.
Angels and demons.
And do we find angels and demons in the gospel? We do. If you know that them as the enemies deny the resurrection, maybe we decide to put the resurrection in our gospel too. And do we find that in the gospels? I need some witnesses. Do we find that in the gospels?
Of course we do.
There's
There we are.
isn't I don't know if it's Matthew's gospel, but Lazarus, the little girl, and even Jesus, are they in Matthew's gospel? All those three resurrections.
Probably.